16 years of BC Liberal and 17 years now of NDP. And we have a crisis in healthcare, we've got a crisis in affordability, we've got a crisis in housing, it's a crisis in addictions, a crisis in crime. People are looking for change.
Would you fire Dr. Bonnie Henry?
We need to put somebody in place that's actually going to be able to have a different approach to how we address the addictions problem.
Do you think that if you were elected Premier, you could work with someone with that mindset?
No.
Hundreds of protesters have blocked the road for days after police enforced a court-order injunction to remove old-growth logging protesters.
How do you deal with that?
So first of all, in the Coastal GasLink, there were people from outside of Canada that came in as well. And I can't believe that we didn't deport these people.
Keean Bexte here in Vancouver for the Counter Signal, where we are about to interview John Rustad. He is the leader of the Conservative Party of British Columbia, and if things fall in the right place for him, he is set to become the first Conservative Premier of this province since the Great Depression. Here's our conversation.
Great. Well, thank you, John, for joining us. I appreciate your time. I know you're busy, so we want to get right to it. British Columbians are going to the polls in about 4 months. There's a ton of issues on the agenda, from the drug supply that's being fed to addicts from Ottawa, to employment, to housing, to infrastructure. We want to get to as much of it as possible, but we'll try to hit the high notes here in our first interview with you. When you get elected, if you were to get elected, I want to know from your perspective what you think the mandate looks like when it comes to dealing with Ottawa, not just with the opposition NDP in that situation.
Obviously, there's big changes that need to happen within British Columbia, and some of that will require some support in Ottawa, some changes in Ottawa. For example, changes to the criminal code. There are structural changes that are needed. There are tools that we can do within the province to deal with crime, to deal with the so-called safe supply, which is not safe, and as well as the decriminalization side. But there are tools that we'll need to see Ottawa step up to the plate. There's issues like immigration as well that need to be dealt with. There's issues around the environment, particularly for major resource projects. So there's a wide range of things that we will need to be working with Ottawa on.
I want to talk about the floor crossings that have happened recently. I'm from Alberta, and I'm no stranger to that situation. Daniel Smith famously crossed the floor to the Progressive Conservative Party, and that did potentially prevent the NDP from coming into power 4 years prior to them actually doing so. With the floor crossings that have happened here, is that an active plan of you and your party to sort of siphon off the right wing of BC United, or is it just happening spontaneously?
It's a little of both. You know, as the Conservative Party, we often said it's not about being conservative or liberal or NDP and Green. It's just standing for what's right and fighting for the average everyday person. And so as we see this grassroots movement grow and expand, what we are seeing is many, many people coming in and encouraging sitting MLAs to come over and be part of the movement that we're doing. We are also reaching out to sitting MLAs to see if they would all be interested in being a part of what we're trying to do to take down David Eby and these radical NDP policies that are very destructive for British Columbia. So we're open to having those conversations, and you know, it's not something that we're expecting a lot of, but we were hoping we'd have a few more come, because obviously that's, you know, part of building momentum and part of making sure that we put the best team on the field that we can for defeating David Eby here in October.
Is there a place in your party and potential government for Kevin Falcon?
I think if Kevin wanted to come over and be part of it, it's certainly a conversation that I would have with him. You know, there's obviously differences between us, but there's no hard feelings at least on my side, towards Kevin Falcon. And so if there's an opportunity to have that conversation, then, you know, it'd be a very interesting conversation to have.
I was looking at the polls, and it looks like the aggregate of your numbers in BC United would surpass the NDP. What do you think contributes to your surge? Do you think it's partly the popularity of Pierre Poilievre and the name comparison that people are making, or do you attribute it to something else?
It's really started, you know, when you're taking a step back over a year ago, the Conservative Party was actually polling at, you know, around 3% before I came in and joined the party. And that was when Pierre was already doing quite well federally. And so there's been a big shift. But what I think it really boils down to in British Columbia is there's been 33 years since 1991, 16 years of BC Liberal and 17 years now of NDP. And we have a crisis in healthcare, we've got a crisis in affordability, we've got a crisis in housing, it's a crisis in addictions, a crisis in crime, a crisis in our resource sector, even a crisis to deal with our finances with debt downgrades. And I think people are just saying enough. enough of what has happened in the past, enough of what has led to these problems, people are looking for change, right? They're looking for that common sense and getting a government that's just going to come back to the basics. And I think that has a lot to do with it. There is certainly some overlap with the federal side, but I think there's some things that we're doing that's actually helping the federal side as well. So there's a little bit of to and fro on that.
Let's talk about health a little bit. You alluded to the so-called safe supply. It has been catastrophic by any sort of sense of the word. What has happened in the downtown east side, but across the entire country, there's an issue with the toxic drug supply. There's also an issue with the federal government that is changing the rules from day to day and police not being able to enforce it. The chief top doc, as the mainstream media would call her, Dr. Bonnie Henry, just came back from Ottawa, actually, where she testified, saying that, in fact, they need more taxpayer-funded narcotics being given to addicts. They need more safe injection sites. Do you think that if you were elected premier, you could work with someone with that mindset?
No. I'm sorry, but when you look at it, that philosophy, British Columbia now has what is thought to be the highest number of addicts per capita anywhere in North America. The policies in place, I should say, of decriminalization and safe supply have been an absolute disaster. These drugs are getting into schools. One of the doctors who's running for us, who has 25 years experience in dealing with addiction and treating people with addictions, was treating a patient, high school student, and asked, and the high school student was actually addicted to these so-called safe drugs, which are not safe. And she asked him, how many more people do you think are addicted to this in your high school? And he said at least 30 that he knew of. And so these drugs are dangerous. They are getting into our supply system. They're creating the next generation of addicts. We need to change course on this. And the fact that Bonnie Henry is interested in doubling down on this and expanding, the decriminalization and safe supply side. The question is she doing that on her own, or is she doing that at the direction of David Eby and his NDP government? That's why I say these policies that they're bringing forward they're disasters, they're radical. We need to change course.
David Eby's involvement in that is questionable. He's been trying to distance himself, but when it comes to Dr. Bonnie Henry, I use Alberta as an example. Daniel Smith came to power, winning the last election. She fired Dr. Dina Hinshaw. She said that it just wasn't in line with what Albertans elected her to do. Would you fire Dr. Bonnie Henry?
So it's interesting that Dina Hinshaw is actually working now in BC for Bonnie Henry, for the government. So that's an interesting.
It is an interesting way things work out.
But I do look at it this way, and I'm not sure where Bonnie Henry is in her contract, but we will be changing course should the Conservatives have the honor of forming government in October. And I can't see how that will work with Bonnie Henry, so we'll certainly have a conversation with her exiting in terms of we need to put somebody in place that's actually going to be able to have a different approach to how we address the addictions problem and how that feeds into so many other things within British Columbia.
So setting aside the bureaucrat, what does it speak to Premier Eby's judgment that he went back and forth on this issue? What is your thoughts, and what do you hear from British Columbians on it?
Well, I look at this also from the context of what happened during COVID, and nobody knew exactly what the right things to do were during COVID. And there's lots of hindsight, looking back, thinking we should have been doing this or should have been doing that. But I look at this now going forward. Every other jurisdiction in North America has dropped their mandates and has hired back their healthcare workers. Bonnie Henry and David Eby are insisting, no, we're going to keep the mandates. We're the only jurisdiction in North America. What science are they following that nobody else is following? We need to drop these mandates. We need to hire back these healthcare workers. And somebody like Bonnie Henry is in the way of doing that. And clearly, David Eby wants this. Otherwise, he would have changed it. He has the power to change it. It's not like he can hide behind Bonnie Henry. It is his government that is preventing these healthcare workers from getting back. It's his government that's preventing us from being able to make the changes we need to move away from the crisis we have in our healthcare system.
An issue that's been affecting every corner of this country is immigration. Now, provinces don't have direct control of immigration, but they do have some control. I know that you've mentioned in the past Quebec has more control than most provinces. I have a few questions on this file, but I'll just start with what you think your government would do on this file. What kind of control do you want?
I actually think that British Columbia needs to control its own immigration. And similar to Quebec, maybe even further than Quebec. from my perspective, I mean, we have shortages. We've got shortages, whether it's truck drivers or nurses or teachers or doctors. Right across the field, we have shortages in our province. So we do need immigration, but we need to make sure we're bringing people in that can fulfill these jobs. We need actually to be looking at pre-qualifying the people that come in to make sure that when they come in, they can actually go straight to work in terms of this. And we also need to make sure that we have the resources available for housing and for other components so that we aren't creating more friction and more problems within our society.
So an issue that's, you know, a fallout effect of this is, and partially a cause, is diploma mills. The province of British Columbia grants about 83,000 student visas per year. That's down a little bit, so they know that there's an issue. But it's still 83,000 new people coming to Canada, coming to British Columbia, taking up housing, taking up healthcare, and getting these degrees or diplomas that are less than less than up to the standard that I think Canadians think of when they think of a degree or a diploma. They think, oh, you know, well, they probably went to U of T and got a degree in political science. Maybe they got a law degree. No, that's not quite what these diploma mills are. That is within the purview of a province. From BC all the way to PEI, it is up to the provincial government to accredit these. Do you think that there's an issue with diploma mills?
I think there is. I think there's a lot of good institutions, both public as well as the private institutions, that actually do a good job of providing those educational services. I think there may be some that, at least there's some that I've heard of, that you know, may be doing just that. It's more about a backdoor for immigration. We want to make sure as a society we have opportunity, particularly for young people, to come to this province and build their future, to be able to get into the workforce, to be able to, you know, buy a home and raise a family. After all, that's what British Columbia was founded on, right? People coming and moving to this province and having that hope for a better future. A lot of that has been damaged by policies that are in place in terms of having those opportunities. But we always want to make sure that we have those doors open, particularly for those young people that come in and take those jobs that are needed in our society. But we do want to make sure that it's done properly, that the province has control in terms of it, so that we aren't in a situation where it's used as a backdoor for just people that want to get into the country through immigration.
To what extent do you think immigration is, to move on to housing, what extent do you think that it is affecting the housing supply and the price of the average home in British Columbia? I'll note, the Counter-Signal just covered this, that the average price of a home in British Columbia is now over $1 million. It's one of the most expensive, if not the most expensive place to live in Canada. Now, it's not foreign to BC, and it has been that way for a long time, but the price of $1 million for a home is something that sticks in the mind of young people like me. What do you think that young people are thinking, and how can they deal with the situation, and how can the government help when they see that price tag on their future?
Well, I mean, the reality is most people can't afford a house that's in that category from just an average wage in the province. So where are people going to be able to have that dream of being able to have a home, to be able to raise a family? Things need to change with regards to how we do things. But immigration plays into it, but it only plays into it because we're not building enough homes. And that's a huge problem we have. We need to double or even triple the number of homes that we're building in British Columbia every year for the next decade to even come close to just stabilizing prices and making sure that we have reasonable stock for rent and for people to be able to buy. So there's a huge investment that's needed, and we have a government today that is actually working against that. There's actually, you know, David Easley's actually said he doesn't think the private sector has a place in housing. I mean, how insane is that? Just about everything that we have is being built, you know, through the private sector, through developers that have built out this capacity. So we need to get to a place where we drop the costs, we improve the timeliness to be able to actually get projects done, and have government come to the table with resources to be able to actually support key infrastructure like water and sewer to allow for this sort of growth to happen. One of the things that drives me crazy is 30% of the cost of a new home is government costs in terms of taxes and fees and what have you. Just the new building code that they're bringing in is adding between $35,000 and $85,000 to the cost of a new home. And it's not making it more livable. It's actually making it less livable for people. So there's a lot that government can do to try to bring down the cost, or at least stabilize the cost of housing and increase supply and allow for wages and the ability for people to be able to buy homes to catch up to where things are at with our pricing today.
So when it comes to building British Columbia, not just housing, but also infrastructure, there hasn't been a lot of major projects being created in the last year, let alone last 4 years. I think about the major construction projects that are happening currently. I mean, they all started from a prior government or from a different level of government, whether it's Coastal GasLink, the Site C Dam, whether it's Trans Mountain. It wasn't the NDP here in BC that says, yes, we need to build bigger, we need to build better, not to use the Joe Biden term, but they just haven't been building at all. Yeah. Why is that? And what project, well, let's start with why that is.
So why would you want to invest in British Columbia when the rules keep changing? Why would you want to invest in British Columbia when you've got a government that's hostile and you have no idea how long it will take? For example, a developer assembles a package of land, looks to move forward in a project. 5 years later, they're still trying to figure out how to move the thing forward, and now the whole cost structure's changed. It makes it very difficult to have confidence to be able to invest in British Columbia. In forestry, up in my riding, you've got Canfor, one of the largest forest companies, certainly in North America, if not in the world, that wants to do a rebuild. It's a $200 to $250 million project. The government's changed the rules, and they said, wait a second, we're just going to have to suspend this because we have no confidence to be able to go forward with this project. We don't know what the payback's going to be. We don't know what the shifting sand's going to look like under this government and changing its rules. Today in British Columbia, there are 17 mines that are either permitted or about to be permitted. Either existing mines, or new mines I should say, or expansions. That represents a $38 billion investment and will generate between 20 and 30,000 jobs. Will add over $800 billion to British Columbia's GDP over the life of those mines. We got to get at it and start getting these things happening. If we want to be able to see real progress in things like affordability, to reduce taxes, to be able to still be able to provide the services that we want in healthcare, and be able to expand out some of these issues that we need to do, we need to get our private sector going. And we have a government that's hostile and doesn't understand that that is a key to being able to be successful in building our future.
One of the issues is for sure government intervention, or rather their lackadaisical attitude towards this. But another, perhaps more humiliating aspect of this for the entire country is the amount of lobby groups that blockade and stop private development. One of the biggest stories I ever covered in British Columbia was a blockade in Fairy Creek, where Teal Jones was trying to log places that they had a lease to, that they had rightful access to, and activists came from Toronto to stop them from doing that. They were actually largely successful. Coastal GasLink up north, same thing. I wouldn't say foreign, but people from Alberta as far as Ontario came to blockade the construction of that pipeline as well. How do you deal with that? Do you need to change the way the police approach this? What's your thoughts?
So first of all, on the Coastal GasLink, there were people from outside of Canada that came in as well. And I can't believe that we didn't deport these people for their actions that they were taking. So I think, a couple of things. I mean, when I was Minister for Aboriginal Relations and Reconciliation, I signed, over 400 agreements. I actually signed all the agreements for things like Coastal GasLink, working with the First Nations to get people on side. But you're always going to have these factions that oppose. It is perfectly fine to protest. It is perfectly fine to, state your opinion, but it is not fine to break the law. It is not fine to put people's lives at risk. And that's where, the government and quite frankly, the police need to be implementing the law. Even today in British Columbia, we have rampant anti-Semitism. We have protests going on calling for, death of Jews in this country. That is unacceptable. Why are the police not taking action against these things? It's like they're afraid to actually implement a civil society. And that's all we're asking for. But if we really want to be able to unleash the potential of this province, and this province has more potential, I think, than any other province in the country, with the resources and the positioning that we have, we need to be unabashed about seeing projects being able to move forward. We want to make sure they meet the highest environmental standards. We want to be respectful of First Nations and open up those opportunities for First Nations to be able to prosper from these as well. But we need to be seeing these things coming forward. We can't just sit back and think we're just going to raise taxes. Under the NDP right now, their current plan, which is this Clean BC plan and all this approach, our gross domestic product is supposed to shrink all the way to just 0.4% by 2030. That means a significant reduction in our quality of life, significantly reduction in government services, and quite frankly, we'll end up with a province that we don't recognize anymore. And I find that unacceptable. And I think that's one of the key pieces why people are looking, saying we need change in this province.
Reducing the GDP is certainly a strange tactic and not one that you'd expect a government to take. I want to just ask you two more questions. I want to get your thoughts on what the issues of the upcoming election are. We've talked about a few of them. What do you think British Columbians are going to go to the ballot box and say, yeah, I'm going to vote for either David Eby, John Rustad, or potentially Kevin Falcon? What are the issues?
Well, first of all, I think it is going to come down to a two-horse race, and it'll be between us and David Eby in terms of forming government. There are many key issues. The top two have always been affordability and which includes housing, as well as healthcare. Those are huge, major issues on the table. But I honestly think what people are looking for is change. People are looking for common sense to be returned to British Columbia. People are looking for a party that's just going to stand for what's right and fight for the average everyday person, as opposed to being locked into ideology. So I think that is ultimately going to be a driving factor within this, backed, of course, with sound policy and approaches that are going to see the opportunity for people to succeed and be able to have a life. When people who have come from places like India and other places in the world that have come here and have been here for 10 or 20 years and are actually looking around saying, we can't make it in British Columbia, my children can't be successful, we're actually looking at going back to India. That means, to my mind, the land and the promise that is British Columbia has failed. We are the promised land in many ways, right? We're the land of opportunity. We're the place where people have come from around the world to be able to have a good life for their kids, to work hard for their kids and their grandkids. That seems to be lost, and we need to change course to get to a place where that hope for a better future can be there for people.
The last question, Kevin Falcon is going to keep coming up in this election. They have the incumbency of the official opposition. They have the history of being in government for such a long time. But with the polling numbers where they are, I think anyone can look at this objectively and see that the person who is most likely to put David Eby back in power in Victoria is Kevin Falcon himself. What is your message to him, if you could speak directly to him, for all British Columbians to hear? What should he do?
So I think what I would say to Kevin Falcon and people who are part of the BC United Party is, I understand their situation, I understand their position. I understand that they're resistant to change. But every generation or two we see this change in British Columbia, where we saw a shift from the Conservative Party to the BC Liberal Party, from the BC Liberal Party to the Social Credit Party, Social Credit Party to the NDP, NDP back to BC Liberal, back to NDP. We're into this next shift. Come and join us. Be part of this grassroots movement. We have an opportunity to be able to sit down and work through how this can be done under a Conservative banner that is really bringing people together from across the province. And I think, it's an exciting time. In British Columbia, and I think quite frankly in Canada, we have never seen this kind of a shift in politics. It's just been, a year and a couple of months since I've had the opportunity and the honor of taking on the leadership of this party. We've gone from 3% to, depending on which poll you're looking at, somewhere between 38 and 40% in that short period of time. It's unprecedented, but it's very, very exciting. People are really, feeling that energy, feeling that change and that potential. It's a great time. So my message to BC United members is, come over and have a look at us, be part of this change that's needed in British Columbia.
Well, thanks for taking the time to speak with me today. It really is outstanding when political leaders will speak with independent media, not simply rely on the mainstream media to get your message out. I have questions whether the mainstream media is honestly reporting a lot of the things that are happening here across the political spectrum, frankly, in British Columbia. So I want to thank you for taking the time. We're going to be following this closely. Our viewers can follow along as well at thecountersignal.com for all of our British Columbia election coverage that's going to be taking place over the next 4 months. And if they want to support the work that we're doing, you can go to supportthesignal.com.
We will continue to keep you informed as this story unfolds.
Hey, thanks so much for watching that full interview. We heard a lot of really interesting things, especially as they involve Dr. Bonnie Henry and his thoughts on deporting criminals who are blockading critical infrastructure. If you want to support the work that we're doing so that we can do more of it, work that the mainstream media refuses to do, you can go to supportthesignal.com, or you could go to thecountersignal.com and get a subscription, only 50 cents for the first couple weeks, so that you can follow along with everything that we do and support the critical work that we are doing.